ADHD, autism, OCD, and anxiety are increasingly mentioned in conversations about decluttering and organizing, and these diagnoses are often referred to as labels. For many, a diagnosis can provide clarity and relief, helping explain why certain tasks feel especially challenging. Yet sometimes labels can also feel limiting or overwhelming, causing people to doubt their ability to change. In this episode, we explore the complex roles of labels in decluttering, when they empower and when they might hold us back. We'll share practical insights to help you understand how to work with your unique brain and habits and get the job done.
You're listening to the Declutter Hub podcast, bringing you tried and tested, no-nonsense tips and advice from the leading experts in decluttering and organising your home. Now here are your hosts, Ingrid Jansen and Lesley Spellman.
Hello and welcome, listeners. I'm Ingrid.
And I'm Lesley. We're delighted you're here to join us as part of your decluttering journey. So whether you're brand new today or have been listening to us for ages, we want to say thank you so much for being here. It means so much to us that you're here to listen to and support us while we talk all things decluttering and organising.
We'd love to help more people with their quest for a clutter-free home, and our podcast is a fantastic way for people to be inspired to take action. We have a favor to ask. If you like what you hear, be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button on your podcast player, share us with your friends, or share your thoughts on the podcast by leaving a review. Lesley, not an easy podcast topic we have chosen to talk about today.
I think it's a really important one as well. And, before we even get started recording, what we want to say is everybody is different. Everybody will have their own ideas about terminology, about what a diagnosis, where people is on their journey, whether even the term label is demeaning in some way. But the reality is that people talk about labels all the time, and for some people that's a positive thing. So we want to get that straight out there.
Yeah.
We'd rather talk about things like diagnoses, but labels is a thing that's bandied around. And so we're just trying to get it out there and discuss our experience, our lived experience of neurodiversity within our families, within our friends, within our membership, within our clients, and how that has affected them. And that's really the only thing that we can do. We can only talk about our own experiences. And obviously everybody has got their own. So labels, tricky one. Ingrid, when we put it down there, Ingrid was like, oh, I just thought we would talk about labels on boxes.
I know. I thought we were going to do a nice podcast about kind of what labels to choose on your containers, on your shelves, and whether you not have labels in your house or not, and maybe that's helpful. There's already me thinking about, I don't have labels on my shelves in my laundry cupboard. And Leslie's like, no, you've completely misunderstood, Ingrid, what we're going to talk about today. And I went, wow, we had it completely we were on different paths here, Lesley. Different paths we were.
I know. Whether we get to the end of this podcast is we don't know. Because Ingrid, let me just tell you, today is grumpy, possibly the most grumpy that she's ever been in the history of recording podcasts, because we're recording this a few weeks early because of holidays and things like that. And it's like 35 degrees or something like that in London. She's in a small room. She's got no heater. She can't have a fan on. The window's broken, blah, 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 blah. And she's just moaned from 9 o'clock this morning. We're now at 2 o'clock. And I'm like, are you still going to carry on moaning all day long? And she said that she absolutely is. So
Yeah.
If it's a little bit tense, adding this podcast into the mix probably wasn't a good idea. But anyway, am I right, Ingrid?
Yes, you are. I am grumpy, and it doesn't happen very often. I stay grumpy for so long, but it's all valid, my grumpiness. But as you know, when I'm recording podcasts or speaking to our members in our membership, whatever, I always try to sound cheerful. Well, I think I'm actually, there's sweat coming from places I didn't know it was possible.
Exactly. Well, I've got my own little label for you, but I won't say what that is today. Yeah? So, don't think that would enhance things. Anyway, back to the matter in hand. So, labels. So, really, as I say, what we want to talk about is diagnoses and whether a diagnosis can be helpful. And a label, in inverted commas, is something that people talk about certainly quite negatively in some instances. Oh, everybody, there's a label for everything. We hear all this stuff bandied around in the news as the conversation about neurodiversity is becoming more and more part of our lives. Now, it's a good thing. In my opinion, any conversation, as long as it's not like a really negative one, is opening up debate and is raising awareness, and that's what this is all about. And we love the fact that the conversations about ADHD, about autism, about anxiety, about mental health, all of the things about physical health, all of the above, we all know what they are, lots and lots of different things, is allowing people to go, oh, actually, I think that might be me. And
Yeah.
to explore different options other than feeling ashamed, embarrassed, alone. And so, whilst the term labels might be considered to be derogatory, we think that a diagnosis of something or awareness of it or thinking that you might have something or being at the early stages of thinking that you might have something like that that's different about your brain or your body, in fact, is really, really helpful, don't we, Ingrid?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because um, I think we were chatting. I was chatting to one of the members, and she said, "Well, she was writing down that one of her kids recently was diagnosed, and now she's like, wow, suddenly things about me are falling into place, and I hadn't really recognized that before. So I think it's really, really changing compared to what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago, even. It's I think if people are more open, they're more maybe also not as afraid to look at themselves and go, ah, right, that explains a lot instead of, oh, well, I was just, always like that, or I didn't know, or I just, I changed over the years, or all those things. It's more discussed now, which is, I think, really nice.
Exactly. And I think that for me, there's a couple of things that I really want to sort of get out there in the beginning, really, which is there are lots of people who are using these terms flippantly. So
Mm,
I'm a bit of a hoarder, I'm a bit OCD, ADHD is coming into the mix. Anxiety is a different one, really, but there's a lot of things where it's used very flippantly, and that
yeah,
is not helpful to the people who are really struggling to get to
yeah,
come to terms with that part of their life. And so, you
yeah,
know, we sort of almost flinch a little bit because we've worked for so many years with people who are living with these kind of neurodiverse conditions and all of those kind of things. It's really hard for us to hear people throwing terms like OCD around, for example, because if you've ever worked with somebody with OCD, and it comes in lots of different guises, that's the thing. This is not
mhm,
just the person who's tidying up their shelves a little bit obsessively. This is a debilitating condition which stops you from living life in the way that you want it to. And so for those terms to be thrown around is really hard for people.
yeah,
Same with, I'm a bit of a hoarder, the debilitating condition, which is hoarding disorder or even hoarding behaviors, again, is stopping people from living the life that they want to live. And for people
yeah,
to kind of belittle that term and just use it as a throwaway comment is really hard to hear from us because we've seen it we haven't experienced it ourselves, but we've certainly seen it secondhand from our clients, haven't we? And
yeah.
yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that. What's your experience, Ingrid? So, both of us have been in the business for 15 years, and clearly, as time unfolds and awareness builds on things, particularly
Mhm,
like ADHD, let's use that as an example. We have been working with people with ADHD that entire time. That there's no
yeah.
doubt whatsoever about that. But the way that we deal with that and the conversations that we have in our day-to-day life is very different. So tell me, would you ever have a conversation then or now? Bearing in mind, of course, that ADHD diagnosis, adult ADHD diagnosis is only like 12 years old, something like that. It wasn't
Mhm,
even a thing
mhm.
it wasn't recognized as a condition until about 12 years ago. Is that a conversation that you would ever have with your clients, Ingrid?
Oh, that is actually quite a tricky question, Lesley, because if I think back at the beginning of my career, I think it was just not, maybe I was naive, Lesley. If I look back now, I was like, oh, I just want to help people, declutter their house and just help them, find things easier and put everything in a place for everything in its place. And in the beginning, back in 2010, 2011, 15 years ago, it did not occur to me. Of course, if you see, but a mental illness, or neurodiverse brain, it's much more difficult. When you see somebody who's, for example, in a wheelchair, you can kind of go, oh, okay, I'm going to need to help them with lifting and carrying, and it's because you can see it. But somebody who's neurodiverse, you can't see it. So in the beginning, I was like, just like this bubbly, happy. I'm still, well, hopeful. Well, not today. I'm not bubbly and happy. But normally I'm bubbly and happy to come in. But now I have learned so much over the years as well. And I started to see throughout our time. And of course, our conversations and the guests that we have interviewed and all the learning we've done ourselves. I now go, okay. In my brain, it all starts to fall more into place. I've always looked at the client and go, okay, what works for you? Not what works for me, what works for you. But I understand that, I think, far more better now than when I did at the start of my career. It's a lifelong learning process. And that's why I feel, as a professional organizer, I'm never done learning. And that's why it's so interesting and so fascinating what we do. And yeah, I think I'm a different person than I was, but hopefully, because I'm 15 years older as well.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head there, really, really, Ingrid, which is, and I'm exactly the same as you. My journey has been the same as yours, and so whilst retrospectively I look back and think, absolutely, that person, and I look back at my clients, some of whom I still work with today, and they've certainly got ADHD, diagnosed or not. They've got the signs of that, that you can see that
Yeah.
are visible there. We're not doctors, but we can sort of see common traits of people with ADHD, for example. But I think we've always, as a professional organizer, it's always about trying to be person-centered, and so trying to find
Yeah.
something that works for an individual. And one person with ADHD is not the same as the next person with ADHD. They have very, very different ways of looking at things and ways of managing their home. So you
Yeah.
can't, even within something, and we're focusing a little bit more on ADHD, but the same for autism or OCD or any of the things that we're talking about.
Hmm.
You can't have a one size fits all for that. There's not, oh, this is a strategy that works for somebody with ADHD. You still have to look at the person and try and work out collaboratively. And that's what this is
Yeah.
about. What's going to work for them? There are certainly some commonalities, the things that are going to work, signs that we see with people, particularly with ADHD, that are going to work a little bit better. But I think for me, the difference in that 15 years, and I think a lot of this is probably a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more confidence, a little bit more experience, well, a lot more experience, and the fact that ADHD, adult ADHD, for example, is now a recognized condition, allows me at times to have the conversation with people. And so only in certain instances, if I've known a client for a long time and the signs are there and I see them visibly struggling and I can see traits that might lead them down that path of ADHD, I might ask the question as to whether or not they've ever sought a diagnosis. And so I
Hmm.
think that's the kind of difference. But I think, the interesting thing is for us, as we've learned, we've gone through quite a journey ourselves, haven't we, Ingrid? Because we've worked
Yeah.
one-to-one in homes with people. Then we've had to find a way, our journey really, I mean, a lot of people know this. We work one-to-one in people's homes for a long, long time. We still do in some instances, but not as much as we used to. Then we had to find a way to try and train other new professional organisers how to do the same thing that we did with their clients, which potentially would be different to our clients. Then we went into the online world and had to then pivot again and to try and think about how we take something that is on a one-to-one basis and to deliver that information verbally or online, and so audibly, via video, things like that. So all of those things collectively have allowed us to think about all the different options and everything that we do, whether it's one-to-one, Ingrid, or whether it's in our membership, for example, or here in the podcast or wherever that might be. We go into a lot of detail, but what we never really do is we never dictate that this is the way you should do it. We have ideas of things that might work, but what we like to do is we like to lay out the options in front of somebody for you to then reflect on what's going to work for you. And I think
Yeah.
that's the most important thing when it comes to neurodiversity.
Yeah. I think it's really important that you, because I think some professional organizers go into this industry because they're like, but I love, color coordinating, and I love putting my books in rainbow order, and I love having everything folded and neat. And I think for me, it's all about what structures will work for the client, will work for our members. We give in our membership so many different options and go, okay, if you are, try this, have a go at that. And I think that's really, really important. So, yeah, I think it's really all about making a home work for you.
Absolutely. And so just jumping back to the kind of labels type thing, which was how we started out this podcast.
Yeah.
The good thing about a label or a diagnosis, whatever you want to call it, is that it brings relief, it brings validation, and importantly, I think it can bring connection as well, because you can find like-minded people. I talked a lot before about the fact that you feel shame, you feel embarrassed, you feel alone. And so sometimes you need your people, don't you, Ingrid, to be able to, just that kind of validation, that connection with other people that feel the same way as you feel or similar things or have struggled in the same way is very freeing and very empowering, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that's definitely, and I think that's one of the things I love the most about the community that we have on in our Facebook group, with our podcast listeners, within our membership, is that people go, oh, wow, I thought I was the only one who felt this way. But we know that clutter reaches far and wide, and just having that group of people that understands how it feels like, and with all the different kinds of levels within that, I think is really, really important.
And I think as well that, and I talk, I've done a couple of podcasts, haven't I, with Luke, which are, we've, just so that everybody knows, we've got lots of podcasts available for you about different type of neurodiversity. So please do seek them out. We'll definitely pop them in the show notes. But of course, for me, the two that really kind of, came home to me were the two podcasts that I did with my son Luke. And so he got diagnosed with ADHD, and I never remember how old he was. I think like 23, 24, something like that. He's now approaching 30. And so he has been living with ADHD and trying to work through that over the past few years. And I've obviously been part of his diagnosis, because that's the kind of the way that it works. You need a kind of adult who knew them as a child to go through that process. So I understand it on a personal level as well, through him and through what he struggles with and through his childhood and things like that. But he's very, kind of, you have to find a way through, and you can't use this as an excuse. You have to go, okay, this is my brain. I can't just throw it out there and go, oh, I can't do that. I can't organize my house. It's impossible to organize my house because I've got ADHD. That's not a thing, because if you want to help yourself with your ADHD, you're going to have to find a way to make your home work for you. And that's the thing. The one thing, particularly with ADHD, is if your home is in order and you have your strategies in place, you have your processes in place, and you have a calmer environment around you, then it's much, much easier. And there's no doubt that there's nothing that's ever going to take away that. That's a fact, isn't it, Ingrid? And so you can't use this as an excuse. You have to find a way through it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think just like people who say, I don't have time. You can't use I don't have time as an excuse. We all need to find a way. We all have pulls on our time. We all have busy lives. So if we want to change something in our own homes, we have to work on it and put the structures in place. So what, Lesley, let's go for a break. And then after break, give some practical strategies on what you can do, regardless of the label that you might have put on yourself or feel like you are. Hi, everyone. Welcome back after your break. We are talking about the labels that we might put on ourselves or other people put on us, and how we can deal with it when we're decluttering and organizing, and what we can do practically within our decluttering to work for us, because we all want less clutter in our house, right? So what can we do, Leslie, to help ourselves?
Well, I think it all starts with having less. I think, and that's important for anybody, regardless of how
Yeah.
your brain works. Having less is going to be easier,
Yeah.
period, right? Just it is
Yeah.
going to be easier. So having less
Yeah.
is really, really important. Having to try and, struggle with a brain that doesn't want to play ball with the things that you want it to do, and to try and have to manage 2 or 3 times the amount of stuff that you actually need in your house is not going to
Yeah.
help. So it all starts with simplicity. It all starts with having less. And now, Ingrid, I'm gonna pass it over to you, because I know what you wanted to talk about in this podcast was actual labels. So here's
Yes.
your moment, but you can't have half an hour, okay?
Well, definitely, I think what can be really helpful, again, neurodivergent or not, is having containers and have those containers labeled. Disclaimer here, if you have lots of clutter, now don't use this to go out shopping and buy lots and lots of containers and buy lots and lots of labels, right? You need to declutter first, determine the location of your items, use temporary storage if need be, even use a temporary label. It can be just a sticky white label or just even a post-it note, as long as they are super sticky and don't fall off everything. But when you're then ready, you can go, okay, now I'm ready to put some items in containers that I have measured. I know what I want. Because there's so many different containers out there, you can go into a whole spin trying to decide on the best container. And then you can go, right, now I'm ready to put some labels on. Of course, there are tons of fantastic label makers that you can buy. You can just buy white stickers. I mean, you can go all out, especially the new label makers. You can put little emojis on there. I mean, I have an old-fashioned one with just one font and one, but you can go all out and put it all in your little computer. It's amazing. So you can go all out with the labels. Or if you're like, well, I'm just not ready to buy some containers yet, you can also start with just labeling some of the shelves, because the labels are super easy to put on and take off. So it doesn't mean that once you decide, because sometimes people can want to do it perfectly, right? They're like, I can't put labels on until I know where the last minutia, where everything, it's okay. You can take a label off and put the label back on again and make another one if it works better for you, right? So don't get hung up on that perfectionism. Just create a little label and go, right, this is where my large bath towels go, and this is the bedding for my son's room, and this is the bedding for the master bedroom, or here's where the winter shoes live when it's summer, or this is where the spices go in the kitchen, or, oh, this is a place for the bras, and this is a place for the knickers, and here's where my sports socks go, and this is where my swimwear goes. Because labels can really help you. And not only you, but also other people, right? So if you ask, for example, your children to help with putting away their laundry when it's folded or when it's kind of comes out of the dryer, having a little label on a shelf can really help them to put it away. So it can be helpful for not only you, but also for others. So I'm a big fan of labels. I do them a lot for clients. I actually don't have a lot of labels in my own house, but that's maybe because I have a little bit less stuff. I know where everything is. I regularly go through it and thin it out a bit again, so I remember where things are. But I can definitely see, especially with people who have more cluttered houses and are trying to kind of have less over time, remembering then, oh, this was the lever arch file where the paperwork for school goes, and this is the lever arch file for the hanging file for the paperwork of the dog. A label can help, really help, a visible label.
I think, you know what, in terms of other strategies, I think I'm really going to direct people to the people who know. And so do listen into Sarah Bicker's podcast. The Ian Anderson Gray podcast that we did was fantastic. The podcast with Luke, the podcast with Hester and Kelly was fantastic. Leslie Joselle, we've got so much good information out there. And a lot of those contain practical strategies and practical things that you can do that are going to help. But I think in terms of a broader kind of thing that's important for you to do, it's really about analyzing where you struggle and recording that information. I think it's about self-awareness, and it's about reflection as to where your barriers are. Where are you falling short of where you think that you need to be? What is it about your home, your stuff, your life, your kids? You know, what is it that's causing you constant consternation? That's kind of a bit of a tongue twister. You know, record those things, and those are the things that we need to strategize over to try and fix and change. And so I think, you know, don't just do the same thing over and go, oh, that was difficult, or don't just put the same thing in the same place and not be able to find it for 30 times over. If those things are a constant battle, then we will be able to find a strategy that's going to help us to fix that. So I think it all starts with self-awareness. I think kindness is also really important to understand and know that your brain is working in a different way, and we can't all do the same things in the same way. So what's very straightforward to Ingrid and I in terms of thinking about the logic of where things go, making sure things are accessible, making sure things are visible, makes complete sense to us. If you've got a different kind of brain, you might feel completely lost. And so you need to recognize that. You know, some people with things like ADHD, you know, we talked about containers and labels. That might not be enough. You might need open shelving. You know, you might need that visible reminder all the time. So it's really about analyzing what you think is going wrong and is causing this constant battle.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, Lesley. And I think what you said about having less overall is so important. I think really we don't realize how much stuff we have until you really start to look at it, because we do become clutter blind. We do, you know, if we're overwhelmed with life and everything, and whether we have anxiety or OCD or ADHD or autism, all this clutter is so hard, and having less really, I think, is the key. And I think that message, hopefully, please listeners, I hope that comes through. Even if you don't have any of these things, having less will help you so much.
Absolutely. So I think that in a nutshell, really, to have a diagnosis in our experience is helpful. You know, certainly is helpful, or to be on that path towards it, even to be researching some other things, because it's very hard, particularly in the UK at the moment. This is not an easy thing to get a diagnosis of any kind of neurodiversity at the moment. It's tricky. It's like if we're relying on the NHS, it can be years before you're going to get there. So we have to start strategizing ourselves really without that external input, which is a shame, but that's where we are. And so we need to kind of work towards that. So I think it can be super, super helpful. It's not good if other people put labels on you that you don't want, but if this is something that is about you, then it can be super helpful. But it doesn't need to define you. It doesn't need to define the success of your decluttering journey. You know, we've never had anybody who has not made positive steps forwards, whether that's somebody with hoarding disorder, whether that's somebody with OCD in particular, is very, very difficult, particularly if it's a kind of contamination OCD, a kind of cleaning OCD, that part of OCD. It can still be done. It might take longer, it might be harder, it might be more troublesome, but we can still make those positive strides forward. And certainly with ADHD, just getting a diagnosis and having that awareness can be a complete game changer for a lot of people.
Mhm.
So we love the fact that the conversation is there. We, as well as everybody else, can sometimes be a little bit clunky with language. There's a lot of terms bandied around. Sometimes we say things that don't land well with people. But I think it's important to recognize that the conversation is out there and it's happening, and people are understanding more and more. So that's why we wanted to discuss this podcast, because it is something that comes into our world quite often. So we hope what
Yeah.
we've spoken about today has been helpful.
Yeah, absolutely, listeners. We hope that it's giving you a little bit of insight. And we also hope that maybe you can have a little think about this podcast and go, okay, so what is the one thing that I can do, one small doable action that I can do to help me with the situation I'm currently in, with the neurodiversity that I'm currently trying to get my head around? What is the one small thing that I can do? So we hope we've given you some tips. And definitely check out those other podcasts that we've mentioned. We'll put them in the show notes for sure. But you can find them all on declutterhub.com on the podcast as well. So hope that's helpful. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you. And we hope to see you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to the Declutter Hub podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us in your podcast player so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next week.